Colby Cook, and welcome to my presentation on adventure and aerial photography. Thank you to the amazing people at the Lititz Association who chose me to do this. Originally, this was meant to be an in-person presentation in November, but understandably that was canceled. So they've asked me to create this workshop for you guys, for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about me or the type of photography I do. So who am I? I'm an adventure photographer based in Philadelphia who specializes in outdoor photography, everything from landscapes to people interacting with the outdoors. I'm also an FAA licensed drone pilot, which means I incorporate a lot of aerial drone footage and photos into my work as well. If you're someone who loves to take a camera with you whenever you're outside, be it on a local hike or to Zion National Park, then this presentation might be for you. Photography helps us capture our perspective. It takes that single moment we're experiencing to show how we see it. From the smallest dewdrops on the grass on a summer morning to light pouring over the Rocky Mountains and filling the valley below. Hopefully, I can help you share your story and create your perspective. So, how I got started. I've been doing photography professionally for about 3 years or so now, but I've been always interested in photography ever since phones started having cameras on them. I grew up in central PA and spent every summer camping, hiking, swimming, spending just about every single moment I could outside. After college, these two passions collided, led me to pursuing this aspiration a little bit more professionally. For me, photography isn't just about capturing the beauty of the outdoors, but also human perseverance and persistence. Not every hike is easy, and the wilderness can be an unforgiving place, but the view at the top is always worth the struggle. These are the feelings I try to convey with my images, the duality of nature and landscapes being both beautiful and harsh. So, what is adventure photography? To me, adventure photography is a little bit of a mix of landscape photography and lifestyle photography. What that means is it blends the sort of traditional sunset landscape scene with the emotions of human interaction. It's people sharing and becoming one with nature in a sense, be it camping, hiking, swimming, kayaking, biking, anything like that. To me, nature has a very calming effect, but is also very powerful and deserves respect. Crafting a story that conveys this with images is adventure photography to me. So, what is aerial photography? This isn't really something that's new, but it's definitely changed a lot in the past 5 years. Before, photographers would have to hire helicopter pilots or plane pilots to be able to get the vantage point they would need for any type of aerial photography. This was extremely expensive and extremely limiting. Not everyone could do this. Almost no average person could do this. It would take a very high-end professional with a lot of money and a specific reason for completing this task, that he would only be able to do it with an aerial view. Today, drones have completely changed the industry. Drones have become very reliable, intuitive, and the cameras keep improving every iteration. Images that used to cost thousands of dollars and could only be completed by a team now can be done by one person with a drone sometimes under $1,000. Drones can be used in a multitude of photographic genres, but personally I believe they are best at capturing landscapes and cityscapes. One can now capture a near limitless number of angles anywhere within legal restrictions. While it does require more planning, more practice, and more controlled risk, aerial photography can be some of the most rewarding type of photography, I believe. So that's it on the type of photographer I am, the type of photography you're going to learn in this presentation. Next, we're going to talk about gear. Starting off with my main camera, I use the Sony A7iii. You might notice that the video and audio sound a little bit different now. It's because I'm filming on my Sony A6000 just so I could show you guys this, because this is what everything else will be filmed on. This is a mid-range, full-frame, mirrorless camera. Full frame just means it's a larger sensor, which just means that images are better in low light and better at reproducing what we see in real life. A mirrorless camera is almost the same as a traditional DSLR, just like a Canon Rebel or a Canon 5D, but the only difference is that there is no mirror. What that means is that the image goes directly onto the sensor, and that when I look through the viewfinder, I'm seeing a digital screen representing what the camera sees. Compared to a traditional Canon camera that most people are familiar with, when you look through the viewfinder, you are seeing the real world. You are seeing the mirror inside reflect that image back up into the viewfinder. So when you take the photo, that mirror flips up, reveals the sensor, that's what captures the image. The reason I picked a mirrorless camera instead of a traditional DSLR is because they are generally a lot smaller and better at video. Two things I look for in a camera. This still might seem fairly large, but when compared to a Canon 5D or other full-frame DSLRs, it is very small, very lightweight, very portable. So when I'm hiking and walking along the trail and holding this or have it on my shoulder, around my neck, it's a huge difference. Being able to carry something so small and so lightweight, if this was the only thing I had, I could walk for miles. Personally, I also love Sony cameras. I've been using them for over 3 years now, and I just feel like they're right now one of the most innovative brands in the market, and really listen to their creators and the consumers on what to change and what to add to make better. So that is why I feel personally attached to the Sony ecosystem. Comparable cameras to this would be Canon's 5D Mark IV, the EOS R, the Nikon Z6, and there are others, but I personally can't say which one is better because I haven't used or tried any of them. And you don't have to start here with a full-frame camera either. I started 3 years ago on the smaller Sony A6000 that I'm using to record this right now, and hopefully it still looks great. It's still a great camera, and I'll go a little bit more into that now. Now, if you're just starting out, there's no camera I can recommend more than the Sony A6000. This is the camera I started on, and I loved it. It's great because it's so small and portable and light, and that was the biggest thing I was looking for. So I took this on all my hikes everywhere, never felt burdensome, and it might look a little large now, but that's because I have a full frame lens on it, the 28 to 75. So definitely looks bigger. I should swap out to the smaller lens that came with it to show you how small it actually is. Alright, well now that we have the kit lens on it, you can see just how small this camera actually is. And it's amazing because even though this is the kit lens, it's still pretty good. I would recommend getting a aftermarket lens as soon as you can for any type of specialty shots, but just starting off, very versatile. The camera has 24 megapixels, records 1080p video, APS-C size sensor, so not quite as big as the Sony A7iii, but just one step down, so it still makes great images that, to this day, for being a 6-year-old camera, still really good. I still use it sometimes myself and I need something a little smaller and lighter. Yeah, it was great for me and everything I needed. The only downside I could even think of is battery life. It doesn't really last too long. I'd say somewhere around 300 to 400 photos. So when I had this, I did have to have 3 to 4 batteries with me if I was out all day shooting. But other than that, everything about this camera is great for any beginner. One of the best things about an interchangeable lens system is the ability to capture a ton of different perspectives and compositions. A lot more than any fixed camera system. So a fixed camera system is something like an iPhone where you only have one lens. Some do have multiple lenses, but they also have multiple sensors. So this is coming a long way with the iPhone 11 Max. With the iPhone 11 Max having 3, a normal telephoto and a wide. So things are improving, but I still don't think it's as good as having one sensor with multiple different lenses you can swap out. Now, personally, for my camera system, I don't have a lot of lenses, and that's for a few reasons. The main one is being cost. Lenses are expensive, but also weight. I like a very lightweight setup because I'm usually hiking or biking or somewhere out where I have all of my lenses in my backpack on me and I'm carrying it myself for long distances, even just walking around the city. I don't like to have a lot of weight on me because if you're out there for hours and you have pounds and pounds of gear on you, it starts to weigh on you and you really can't get to the spots you'd want to as quickly or as easily, and that kind of discourages you from taking those types of photos. So to me, having less gear but the ability to get to places that let me create more unique shots is what I prefer. The other good thing about not having a lot of lenses is that I really don't worry about what lenses to bring on certain things because what I have is good for 95% of what I'll need. So I guess to start off, we will begin with my most used lens, the Tamron 28-75 f2.8. This is what is called the standard focal range and is usually one of the first zoom lenses that a photographer will buy. The reason for that is because this is 28-75, but usually 24-70, something within that range, is a good range to start with the wide end, 24-28, to capture a general scene, to the telephoto end, 70-75, to get up close portraits type shots, things like that, with more focus on the subject than the entire environment. The f2.8 also means that it's good for low light situations and situations where you want to blur out the background, detail shots, portraits, things like that. The second lens I have is the Tamron 17-28 f2.8. Very similar lens, but in this case, wide angle. So I use this lens mainly to capture wide landscape scenes where I want to take the entire scene in one photo. 17mm being on the wide end, fairly wide on a full frame camera. 16-35 is the traditional wide angle zoom lens, but I chose the Tamron because even though it sacrifices the focal range, it's so lightweight and small that it's so easy to put in my bag and always have a wide angle on me. And the f2.8 is incredible because not only does that get me the blurry backgrounds or good and low light capabilities, which aren't necessarily the most sought after thing on a wide angle lens, but at f2.8 it is bright enough and lets in enough light that I can double this as an action photography lens, and that is something very important to me. So as of now, if I'm ever going anywhere on a trip or a hike or anything like that, even just out to the city maybe, if I want to bring my entire bag with me, these are the only two lenses I'm going to bring. With these two, I'm basically covered for any situation. I think I have my wide angle city shots and I have my close-up detail shots. Currently, I do not have a super long telephoto, but maybe that'll be something I'll add one day, and I'll still stick with two lenses, but which one will get swapped out will depend on what I'm doing. The last lens I own is the Sony A7iii f1.8. This is strictly my portrait lens. I use this for any type of portrait shoot, engagement, proposal, things like that I've done so far. That's really about all I use it for. It's a little bit longer reach than my 28-75, but just a little bit, 10mm, so it's not a huge advantage on the telephoto range to really advocate bringing it with me in my backpack and having it take up a little more space and weight. So I really don't bring this with me hiking out on the trails and things like that a lot. But as a portrait lens, it is fantastic. It's cheap, it's fairly small, very good, very sharp, and probably the best one you can get for the money compared to the other options available to Sony right now, at least. Now we'll move on to probably the more complicated gear, and probably the one that most people want to learn about, and that is the drone. So I have a DJI Mavic Pro. This is DJI's current flagship drone for the consumer. There are a lot more factors to choosing a drone than choosing a camera, and some of them can get pretty technical, so I'll try and explain them the best I can and why I chose this drone. The three most important things to me are size, camera, and connectivity. So for size, you already know that I like to keep a very small, lightweight gear set up, so when I can just put it on my backpack and go hiking, it's not super burdensome, super heavy, and just tiring me out on my multi-hour hikes in the day. And as you can see, this drone is incredible. How small this can actually get for what it can do is such an accomplishment. Right now, it's folded up even, and this can fit directly into my backpack in one of the slots for the lenses, alongside my camera and my other two lenses, as well as a few other things I keep with me. That's incredible for the type of images and video that this thing can produce. When it's folded out, it's not that much larger. So this is the full size of the drone, fully folded out. And you can see it's definitely a little bigger, but for what this drone can do with 20 megapixel camera and 4K video, all of this fits in my backpack in this fairly lightweight package. That's pretty incredible. So for the camera, this drone features a larger 20 megapixel camera, making it great for both photographers and videographers. 20 megapixels is actually just a little bit less than my Sony full-frame camera, which is pretty incredible that they can put that onto a drone. The main advantage to the larger 20 megapixel camera is that it covers a better range of colors and detail. So what that means is that I can bring back the darkest shadows and the lightest lights in a photo better than I could some of the other drones like the DJI Mavic Air and the Mavic Mini. The last thing that I look for in a drone is connectivity type. And what that means is how does the remote connect to the drone? There are two options for that right now, Wi-Fi and radio frequency. If you're someone who flies in crowded cities or you like to push it to the edge of the limits of what the distance can go legally while still being able to see it, then radio frequency is the way to go. Before this, I had a Mavic Air that used Wi-Fi, and while using it in Philadelphia, I had almost lost it due to interference. And I never want to lose a drone in the city again, and that is why after that I immediately upgraded to the radio frequency, which has a much more stable connection and can't get interference from large amounts of Wi-Fi in an area like a city. There are a few other important things to think about when you're getting a drone. The next thing I could think of would be flight time. This drone has one of the best flight times on the market currently, rated at just around 30 minutes or so. I can normally get, while being safe, around 25 to 28 minutes before I really want to bring it back in. I never push the drones too far. I never go below 10% battery life just because I like to be safe. So having the longer flight time is great for two reasons. One, it gives you more time in the air to look for different compositions, capture more photos, more videos, and kind of just takes the stress off of like that time feeling, like you only have so much time in the air and it's a very small amount of time. So you have to rush to try and find whatever thing you're looking for. With the Mavic Air, I think that battery life I had before was rated at 20 minutes, but I could never really get any more than like 14 to 16. So this is an extra 10 minutes, which might not sound like a lot, but once you're in the air, time slows down a little bit, it feels like. The other good thing about having a long flight time is less batteries to carry. Now, I still do have 3 batteries to carry just in case because 30-minute flight times aren't long for some more professional shoots that I want to do. But for hiking and things like that, it's not a huge hindrance and the batteries are small enough and light enough that it's not terribly inconvenient for me to put them in my bag. The only downside of the batteries is that they are a little bit expensive. I believe each battery costs about $120. Some other great features on this drone are the sensors for obstacle avoidance. So what these do are prevent crashes. They don't necessarily fly the drone for you as of yet, but they are very good at avoiding walls, tree branches, buildings, anything like that that you might accidentally hit or things like that. So this is equipped with 10 sensors for omnidirectional sensing. So what that means is that it has sensors on the top, bottom, front, back, and sides. So it can sense just about anything coming at it or what you're flying towards. Don't completely trust it just in case because some small things, branches, twigs, or power lines, it can't see perfectly just yet, so always be careful. The last reason I chose this drone is because DJI makes great software to accompany them. They make it super easy to fly and even have a bunch of built-in modes for certain movements or certain type of video you want to create and does it all on its own. So it's very easy for a beginner to start off and learn how to fly. Some of the other features that the software have are things like object tracking, where you can actually choose a person or a car or any type of object that you want the drone to track. This is great for video. Say you want to choose a car driving down the road. You just click on the car on the screen and the drone knows to follow it and keep it in frame. One of the other great features that it has is the hyperlapse function. And what this is a moving time lapse, where it's easy enough to set up. You set up how many photos you want to take, how frequently you want to take them, and how long you want the video to be. So what this does is fly the drone on a specific path that you set, takes a photo every 2 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever you set it to, and then at the end compiles it all into one time-lapse video, which always look great. Some of the other modes are certain movements. One of the ones I probably use the most is where it circles the object you choose. So let's say you want to circle around a building, You have it on screen, you select the building you want to circle, it identifies it, and then automatically creates a path for the drone to fly to circle and record that while still facing it, keeping it in the center of the frame. The best advice I can give to anyone who wants to get into aerial photography or videography is to practice flying first before you really get into the taking photos aspect of it. Make sure you practice in a large open area or field or something like that to really get comfortable with the controls and the movement and with how fast you go or what the tolerance is for stopping, turning, and just getting comfortable with all those types of things, because flying a drone is a lot riskier than taking your camera out with you. You want to get to the point where flying the drone is comfortable and you really don't even have to think about it when you're moving the sticks, trying to think about which one does or how far to push it to get a certain smooth movement. It really needs to become second nature. So the last thing I want to talk about is whether or not you should become licensed or not. So these rules are kind of changing all the time, but if you do not want to fly professionally or commercially in any way and you're not flying in any large or dense cities, I would recommend you remain a hobbyist and do not pursue the license. If you plan to use the drone in any way commercially, everything from selling one print to someone or using it in a marketing campaign or real estate, you need to have a license. This process involves taking an FAA exam, which goes over everything from reading maps to understanding weather to understanding the physics behind flying on some types of aircraft to runway protocol. There's a lot of things on there that aren't necessarily drone specific, but are very useful for knowing how to fly and how to communicate with air traffic control towers. For me, it took about 5 to 6 weeks of studying before I felt confident enough to take the test, and I did pass on my first try. This license then needs to be renewed every 2 years. I have not hit that point yet, so I can't really speak about that. Alright, now onto the fun part. Tips for better landscape and aerial photos. The first rule is that there are no rules, only guidelines. Most of these tips or rules help someone find the balance and flow in an image, but the creativity to break these rules is what makes a photographer an artist. So I'm going to start with 2 areas that I think really exemplify my work, and that would be depth of field and leading lines. For me, these are 2 of the most important aspects or guidelines or rules or whatever you want to call them that I look for when I'm looking at an outdoor scene. To me, they really kind of bring the viewer in and make you feel like you're a part of the scene, and that's the connection I want to make in my images. If I can make someone feel like they're experiencing the scene with me, then my image is good. So for depth, I usually like to shoot at fairly wide open apertures, anywhere between f2.8 and 5.6 if I want to get it a little bit sharper or there's something I want to include in the image. And the reason I do this is because it feels a little more organic, a little more like real life. Everything's not perfect and sharp. You have a little bit of softness in the foreground or a little bit of softness in the background, and it just kind of makes you feel like you're a part of the image of the scene. I know a lot of old school traditional landscape photographers shoot at f8, f11 on a tripod and have long exposure times to make sure everything's sharp and in focus. That's not really how I like to shoot. If you like to shoot that way, that's great. But I'm more of a run and gun lifestyle, like catch each image instead of a set up in one spot and make sure the entire image is sharp and clean. That's just different opinions. Again, these are guidelines, not rules, so breaking them is part of the fun. One of the tips I have for this is to try and find a complementary foreground area to kind of shoot through when you're taking your photos. And this adds a lot of depth to an image and, again, helps with making the viewer feel like they're there. This also adds a lot of context and character to an image, kind of adding to the scene subtly, just giving you a little bit more information about where you are, what's there, what type of environment you're in. For example, instead of just shooting a rolling mountain or a valley on an overlook, try looking around for some distinct or unique plants to shoot through, just to add a little bit to the feeling of where you're shooting from to what you're shooting towards. This could be as simple as getting a little bit lower to the ground, shooting through some low plants, rocks, grass, shrubs, just to add a little bit of out of focus foreground to just lead into that background or the subject of your image that you're really trying to focus on. And just having that complementary piece really separates your work from just standing there standing there and taking the photo chest level, eye level, and just snapping the shot. So get creative with this. There's a lot of different ways to add depth to a photo. You can add this on the bottom, like I was talking about, shooting through grass or rocks to kind of lead to the subject beyond that. Or what you can do is you can look for tree branches on the side with leaves, adding leaves on the side for the depth. Above, you can even, sometimes I've found really great shots where I have a subject and I'm able to step back from what I'm looking at and able to find that there's a tree that creates the leaves on top and the frame on the bottom to kind of frame the image within that depth of field blurriness of the area that I'm shooting in. So it really just draws the user into your subject while also giving you the context of where you are. And this is one of the things that really helps someone feel connected to an image. The second thing I look for most are leading lines. Leading lines are concrete or imaginary lines within an image that sort of draw the viewer's eye towards a subject or lead and balance an image in a creative and symmetrical way. You can use these to draw attention to specific subjects in your image or use them to sort of balance and create a symmetry for simpler compositions. Either way, it takes practice to recognize these lines because not all of them are concrete lines like in a city with buildings or roads or power lines. A lot of them are imaginary, flowing, especially in nature. You have rivers, trails, the difference between mountains, things like that. Light can even become a leading line in some cases. This tip is extremely useful in aerial photography. By being in the air, you're a lot higher up and can see a lot further out. You can also adjust the camera to point down, showing the ground and an area that you really can't get to and can't see. So it really presents a lot of different patterns, lines, symmetry that we wouldn't even recognize in our daily lives. For me, I like finding rivers or roads that kind of cut through an image and lead to a harmonious sort of scene that leads you through the image into what I want you to see. Be careful with this though, because too many intersecting lines or too much chaos can kind of make the subject seem lost and it just becomes chaos. Again, these rules can be broken, so if you want to show the chaos or the many intersecting lines of whatever the image is you want to capture, then go ahead and do it. If it makes the image work, then it's useful. But if you want a simpler composition, just be careful you're not having too many leading lines leading the viewer's eyes away from what you really want to focus on. And the last big tip I can give isn't really a tip at all, but just an inherent dependency on photography, and that's light. Light is what makes photography possible in a lot of ways, and can have a huge effect on the type of images you produce. Light can completely change the mood of an image. If it's sunset with zero clouds and golden light is pouring in on your scene, it presents a nice warm, peaceful tone. But if it's stormy and overcast and it's very dull, very flat, very gray, possibly dark, it presents a cooler, sort of moodier tone to the image. So the best tip I can give for this is just knowing what kind of light you have and where it's coming from. Is the source of light in front of your subject, behind your subject? Is it morning, sunset, midday, night? Are there any reflections off nearby water or glass? Is there no sunlight at all? Is there only the moon, artificial light, neon lights, city lights, street lights, things like that? Light is a huge part of photography, and if you want to create a memorable image, you have to learn how to work alongside it instead of against it. So the next thing is finding places to take photos. One of the biggest parts of adventure and outdoor photography is actually finding the locations to shoot at. Hiking hours of rough trails to be rewarded with an amazing view at the vantage point is one of the most satisfying things, both for photographers and for ourselves personally. But we're not all so lucky that we can travel to national parks every day, so we know that the view at the top is going to be amazing no matter what. If you really want to do well and create some amazing images, you have to do a little bit of research first. So the first thing I do when I find a new area that I haven't been to and want to know if it's good for photography, I usually just go right to Google Maps, satellite view, and see what the area looks like. From there, I can also see if there are any online images posted on that spot. Next, I usually go to Instagram and look that up under locations to see if there's any more professional photos of it. Together, these usually give me a good idea of what the most prominent features are in this area, or what areas are most commonly photographed, or what's the biggest draw to that area. So I use this kind of like a guide to find what could be called the shot for this area. But I also use it so I know if that's the shot, what can I get that's different, that differentiates myself so I'm not just reproducing the same stuff everyone does. Another great website I use is called The Photographer's Ephemeris. This website is actually amazing because it shows you at any time and place throughout the year where the sun is and what time it's going to set or rise, in what location down the angle. So what you can do is look up where you want to go and it'll put a pin down right on the maps so you can see overhead what angle the sun is going to rise, what angle the sun is going to set, and where it'll intersect. So if there's a prominent building or mountain or feature in that landscape, you can kind of get an idea of what time of day the sun is going to line up perfectly behind that. So this paired with Google Maps 3D view is super beneficial for aerial photography because this lets you know what the buildings or the object on the horizon is going to look like and where that sun is going to be. So if you really want to line up buildings with the sunset or a mountain with the sunset on your drone photos, this website perfectly lets you plan it down to the minute. This is also useful for knowing how early you have to wake up if you want to get to a trail or a certain spot by sunrise, or how late you're going to have to stay on a trail at sunset. So that means walking down in the dark. So these next two apps are only useful if you really want to get into astrophotography, but they are highly recommended and almost necessary for astro. On my phone, I use the Skyview app, and this lets me know where all the stars are in my location. It's even connected to the compass on my phone, so I can take the phone, face it towards the horizon, turn, and know exactly what stars are going to be in what location. And this really helps me pinpoint where the Milky Way is going to show up and at what time. Along with that, I use a website called lightpollutionmap.info. This is an amazing service that lets you see how much light pollution there is in any area in the world. So what you want to do if you're looking for astro is get to an area with the least light pollution as possible, because all of the bright lights from the city drown out the light from the stars. And if it's a darker area, you get more stars, better photos. So for our East Coast people, basically anywhere near Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, Boston is shot. There's so much bright light from these large cities on the East Coast that it's nearly impossible. And if you really want to get to a dark sky zone that has the perfect spot for deep space photography, the best are Cherry Springs and Acadia and the Adirondacks. They're all very far drives from Philadelphia, but worth it if you really want to see dark sky. So the last tip I have is that while all of these apps and tools are great if you want to research and find out and plan for an area, but sometimes it's really best to just stumble upon an incredible moment. Visiting a place and having no expectations can sometimes lead to creative ideas that aren't really influenced by things you've seen or things you're trying to accomplish. Instead of firmly sticking to a plan that you made days in advance, you're kind of free to experience the area and come up with your own ideas in that moment based on what's actually happening, what's around you. It lets you adapt and kind of feel what type of image or what scene is going on to really capture that moment. So, if you made it this far, thank you so much, and thank you to the people at the Lititz Art Association for choosing me and letting me create this video for you. It really means a lot to me that you chose me and that you decided to watch this video. If I can just end on one thing, it's that photography isn't just the trendy images you can create that are popular right now. If you're always chasing a trend, are you going to look back at your photos 5 years from now and really appreciate them? Are they really going to affect you in any meaningful way if you were just doing it to follow what was popular in that instance? Are you going to feel connected to them? Photography is telling a story with this single moment in time. Photography is raw and it captures emotion and it captures the world we live in. It's not always a set up trendy shot that you're just trying to recreate for Instagram. Photography has always been used to capture life and who we are and what we are and how we interact with each other, with the world around us. Photography, in the end, it's about the emotion. It's about what this photo makes you feel, how it affects the viewer, and everyone views things a little differently, but if you're able to convey a story or a feeling just with an image alone, it's very powerful, and that is why I love photography. That's why I keep trying to make different types of photos. This is why I keep pursuing every type of opportunity I can, because creating these emotions and feelings in others with just a simple image is amazing to me. This is why I keep going and keep creating, because that passion to just create something that makes others feel deeply in some way and feel connected to an image is why I love photography.